Hey, everybody. We're back this week with a bonus episode with Blue Giant Chinese from New Orleans. As you know, we are a Virginia-based podcast, so as you can assume, this entire podcast was recorded over the phone. So with that in mind, enjoy. From Rixie, this is Butter. I'm Nathan Rivas. The show about chefs and the impact food has had on their lives, their businesses, and the community. Today's conversation with Billy Jones and Richard Horner of Blue Giant Chinese in New Orleans. American Chinese food is something that I think is more American than apple pie. This was an argument made by David Chang's Ugly Delicious. Laws preventing Chinese immigrants from owning land led to legal loopholes that allowed special privileges for opening restaurants, which led to a massive explosion in Chinese restaurants starting in 1915. As a result, these experiences became ubiquitous to the American lifestyle and a staple meal for many busy households. Then you have Billy Jones and Richard Horner. While both of them had different upbringings, both grew up with a healthy love and respect for Chinese food. I hit them up on Instagram, and we decided to talk about what led them to open this place and where they are today.
Yeah, my name is Richard Horner. I am the co-owner of Blue Giant Chinese in New Orleans, Louisiana. And my business partner, Billy Jones, is also here. Hey, how's it going?
Good. How's it going?
He's the other co-owner and chef.
We're going to start things off by talking about your upbringing, what your relationship with food was like growing up. So what was that like for you guys?
So I grew up in England. We moved there when I was 5 years old. And in the early 90s, England did not enjoy a great reputation for food, and that was well-deserved. Chinese food was something, it's certainly that westernized version of it that was good, that was very enjoyable, and a welcome change from the very, very bland school lunches that seemed to be the majority of the rest of the meals that I grew up eating. And then neither one of my parents were especially fabulous cooks, and I think one day I complained too much, and they said, well, if you don't like it, do better yourself. And so that was when I first took an interest in food and cooking, like as something you could do yourself.
Well, it's super interesting. How long were you in England?
We moved there the day I turned 5, and I came back right before I turned 18 for college, actually at the University of Virginia. I know you're in Virginia yourself.
Yeah, we're in Culpeper, so just an hour north. I was in Charlottesville today.
Oh, nice. Yeah, my mom lives there now. And actually, Billy's wife's last name is Culpeper, so just a fun little small world here.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes people come through here with a 540 area code, and they're very adamant, like, it's 540, not 504, because that's area code here. And I'm like, yeah, I know where you're at, Virginia.
There's a lot of Virginia transplants down there, oddly.
Quite a few. We just got off the phone with someone who's been helping us sort of with PR and stuff, who was actually a classmate of mine at UVA. Obviously, very well-known restaurateur Mason Hereford from Turkey and the Wolf. He's from Charlottesville, another classmate of mine.
Turkey and the Wolf is an immensely popular sandwich shop in New Orleans. They were nominated for Bon Appetit's 2017 Best New Restaurant. I've been following them on Instagram for a while, and sure enough, that's how I found out about Blue Giant. Yeah, I found you guys through their Instagram, I think.
Oh, okay, nice. His cousin is a public defender down here now, who we also went to college with. It's crazy because none of us are like crazy active in the alumni association or anything like that. Or I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I know I'm not. It's funny that we all just sort of ended up down here independent of each other. And there's other people too.
You grew up in England. Chinese food was your comfort food, kind of. That's what you were trying to relay.
Well, yeah, and Billy has a very similar experience, but sort of coming from the North Shore here.
So, what was your upbringing like, Billy?
So I grew up 20 miles north of New Orleans and out in the suburbs. So my mom was born and raised here. So a lot of the food I grew up with was classic New Orleans fare. All the we would have gumbo once a week. We would have red beans and rice on Mondays. All that cliche stuff was just kind of normal to me. But on very special occasions, we would go to we had a fancy Chinese restaurant in town. It was like the most ornate palace of Chinese restaurants. I mean, it was probably like 300. It's still there. It's just called Trey Ed. It was like 300 seats, and there's like, ornamental dresses and dragons carved out of wood, and the ceilings are 20 feet high. And it was such like an experience as like a young child to go there. And then on top of it all, it was like this style of food that was like there was no other flavors I could compare it to. But the only thing that was kind of remotely tying everything together is it was also, weirdly enough, comfort food because of how big the flavors were, and so I just kind of fell in love with it. And when I became a professional chef, that was kind of like the thing the cuisine that me and Richard both independently were seeking out on our days off to kind of wind down and be like, oh man, I had a long week. What if I got some Chinese food? What's good in town? And then that kind of sparked a conversation between us about, what if we did this? What would our food look like? What would it taste like if we actually started making this comfort food that we seek out on our days off?
Billy and Richard had different upbringings, but somehow they both developed a love for westernized Chinese food, which I'm sure is the case for many Americans. For Billy, Chinese was something fancy. For Richard, Chinese food was comfort food. What were your guys' go-to orders when you went to these restaurants?
Always fried rice, always egg drop soup. And those are two of the things that I think we're proudest of here. I mean, fried rice is such an elemental part of the Chinese food menu. I mean, it's something that, if you're just sort of a run-of-the-mill place, where it's $1 to upgrade your side of rice that comes with your entree to fried rice, then you get kind of a version of it that's not very exciting, that doesn't do the dish justice. But if you're at a place that does it well, and there are places around here that really showed us that it could be done to where it's its own exciting dish. It's a very nuanced and technique-driven dish that has a lot of flavor. That's much more than just like, rice that's been put in a wok and stirred up with stuff in it.
Yeah, our idea of fried rice is not an afterthought or a side dish. It's one of the hardest dishes to nail, and quite frankly, one of the most underrated and overlooked fried rice Chinese dishes. So that was always very important, that if we were judging a Chinese restaurant eating in our days off, whether they had good fried rice or not. And then egg drop soup is just, it's like a warm hug. It's like, if it's good, it's really good no matter what temperature outside it is. It's just, it's just something that's, those two things were just ubiquitous with Chinese restaurants.
Yeah, otherwise, I think we'd mix it up depending on where we were at. Like if they had something they recommended or something we had heard was good there, we'd want to try that. But, there's some dishes you'll see everywhere, and everywhere's a little bit different in how they make them. But there's usually if someone recommends something, there's a reason for it, and they're proud of it. And it was interesting to both sort of see the variation of these dishes that exist everywhere, and also how there were still unique dishes everywhere. And that sort of helped us guide us in how we created the menu, and how, there are things that people expect, and then things that are good enough that they, someone might step outside of their comfort zone to order it, even though they haven't seen it on a Chinese menu before, or certainly have not ordered it before. Because we have a pretty small menu, and it's even more limited now given the takeout only circumstances.
That was one thing I've noticed looking at your menu is it's really tight, and I imagine that allows you to control quality.
Yeah, that was the goal. And so, but also in that the challenge is finding enough variety to be able to appeal to as many people as possible without it being sort of disparate and disjointed.
Yeah, our theme overall theme of the menu is American Chinese food, but there are some dishes that can be found in China, but they're also like you find them in every single menu and every single Chinese restaurant in Chinatown in New York that you wouldn't necessarily find here. And so we did a lot of research in New York and Chicago, and we found some dishes that we didn't necessarily grow up with, but we thought were definitely worth us trying our hand at, and challenging our cooks to come up with the best version of what we had, and paying homage to like those people who opened these Chinese restaurants so long ago and do it perfectly. And it's such an art form that we wanted to kind of like still keep our chef's hat on and be creative, but in a way that would take these classic dishes such as Peking duck and dan dan noodles and not fuck them up in a way or just twist them in a fusiony way, but just literally take them and kind of recreate them and based off of what we know and what we tasted and make them the best version of that.
So you went to University of Virginia. What did you study while you were there?
English, which is why a career in restaurants seemed to be my destiny. I studied English literature. I worked in UVA dining the whole time I was there in some capacity or another. Whether it was always in some sort of like, snack bar attached to the main dining facility, like at O Hill, Observatory Hill. Whether it was, front or back of house, mostly cooking. Nothing very advanced. I think the most like challenging thing was stretching out the pizza dough for the Sbarro Express that was in there. But everything was in packets, like already pre-made or whatever. There was no
Sbarro.
There was no like seasoning to taste or anything. But it was the kind of I enjoyed it. And then I worked at a barbecue place that doesn't exist anymore there called Belmont Barbecue. That was down in the Belmont neighborhood. I don't know what it's called now. Right next to the restaurant, The Local. I think that's still there. So that was that. And then in 2010, I moved to New Orleans. Shortly thereafter, started working at Coquette, which is a fine dining restaurant here, kind of like a casual but very upscale in terms of the food restaurant. That's been here for about 12 years now. And that was my first foray into fine dining, and I worked the salad station until one day I think somebody didn't show up, and they were like, okay, you work this station now. And they taught me a lot and just went from there.
I basically just fucked around in high school and didn't make very good grades. And, all of my friends were going to LSU, so I moved to Baton Rouge, went to community college for a little while, and I was cooking when I met my girlfriend, who's now my wife, I was cooking at like this sports bar there, and I got accepted to LSU. She'd already graduated, and as I was about to sign this loan for the semester, she asked me, "What do you want to do?" Like, I was like, I don't know. I'm just going to LSU. All my friends are going to LSU, and she was like, "Hold on a second. Like, what do you want to do?" And I was like, "Well, I like cooking."
Billy's journey is not unlike many others. You may come at a point in your life where there are two pathways. One is the traditional get educated and get a career, and the other is sweat equity. Had he not made this decision, Blue Giant may not be around, and we may not be talking today.
Just had to go to culinary school. And this fancy new culinary school just opened up in Baton Rouge. So I signed on, and then I graduated from there, and I did my internship in this resort plantation out in the middle of nowhere in White Castle, Louisiana. It was like an hour drive to and from every single day. And from then I moved to New Orleans. I hooked up with owner of Koshan, who knew my boss, gave me a job at Koshan. I worked there for a couple of years. It was great. Decided that I needed to broaden my horizons. I moved to Chicago, and I worked at this Michelin star restaurant called Sepia for a year or so, and then I moved back. And my plan was to help open up my old boss's new restaurant, Donald Link's new restaurant called Pesh. I kind of just stayed at Koshan because they put me at Butcher, and I liked it a lot, and I just kind of didn't want to leave. And from then on, I worked my way up to chef cuisine there. So I had probably like a 10-year stint at Koshan, actually. Probably 2 years before I left there, I hired Richard, and we just became friends, and we worked well together. And
we also have the exact same birthday.
We do have the exact same birthday.
So if you put any stock in that, that's probably
yeah. And so I think it was after one New Year's, or probably 2 New Year's services before we opened Blue Giant. We were sitting in a bar, just beaten to hell. I mean, New Year's is the worst night in the world for service industry. It's just awful. And I turned to him, I go, I don't want to do this again. I was like, I'm done. I mean, Koshan's like 200 and some seat. It's a brand new menu. It was just an awful experience. And I mean, it's good, but it takes it out of you. So I was like, man, I want to do my own thing. You know, like I've been here for 10 years. And so he was like, he literally said, all right, what do you want to do? And then we got to talking. And 2 years later, we opened Blue Giant.
How did you guys come up with the name Blue Giant?
We went through a number of ideas on that one. And then one day I was in the prep kitchen at Koshan stirring 1,000 gallons of rabbit stew, or however big that batch is. It's not really 1,000 gallons, but it's like a lot of rabbit stew, or gumbo, or making some tremendous amount of macaroni and cheese. And Billy came back and he's like, "I've got it, Blue Giant." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "The name of the restaurant." I was like, "Huh?" He goes, "Because of catfish." I was like, "What?" But there are big blue catfish here that apparently some people refer to from time to time as blue giants, and also big catfish in China that they also eat as part of their sort of cuisine. And so that was, I mean, we're not in the business of doing fusion food at all, but we wanted to acknowledge, our location, at least where we are in the world, and being able to find that sort of culinary link between the two, like where we are and the food that we serve was fun. And
it's just, to me, it seems like really big catfish are both inherently American and Chinese, and that's what our restaurant is. We're American Chinese food. So there was that kind of link between the two, and it also made for a really cool logo.
So you guys came up with the idea while working together at Koshan. How did things progress from there? Because I think I started following you on Instagram back in around when you started it, and it was about 3 or 4 months before you guys got it up and running.
Oh man, it was longer than that.
Oh God.
We had the idea, and like Billy said, we were having drinks at the bar that I'm looking at out of the window, like a spurned ex, just hoping that one day it can come back into my life. I miss it so much.
They might not be able to survive without you, Richard.
We went back and forth on the idea, and then we'd spend our days off like either eating at Chinese restaurants or trying our best to cook Chinese food in my kitchen at my house.
So just a little bit more in depth to that. We would work at Coach We'd have a full shift, and then I would just start brainstorming about menu ideas, and then we would have a meeting one day after work, and I would say, "What do you think about this for menu?" And I would spout off some ideas, and Richard would go, "Yeah, I like this, but maybe we tweak it this way, or maybe we need another gluten-free option, or maybe we need another vegetable here." And so it kind of started with a very rough menu idea of dishes that we agreed were, make sense for our American Chinese restaurant. And then testing started. And also research started. So that was kind of like the same timeline.
So then once we were confident that we had a solid business plan and a solid concept that we could execute, we got in touch with a commercial realtor to start looking for locations. And that was quite a undertaking. He showed us places all over town, and there were some really, really great ones. But nothing really.
I was excited for every single one of them, and Richard would be like, "What are you doing?" And thank God, because I would have been like, "First one, let's go."
So eventually he came to us, and he found this location. Like I said, it's a block away from the bar where we first came up with the idea to open a restaurant. It's in the neighborhood we both live in, and it's very centrally located for all sorts of foot traffic, which obviously now means nothing. But it was really cool when we found it. It was cool up until about a month and a half ago.
It was you had to look into the potential of the building, if you will. It was like, it used to be an old bookstore, but you wouldn't be able to tell. It was 4 walls and a sand floor, and we had to basically ask around our friends, and mostly our friends who already opened restaurants, like, what's the next step? What do? We have this menu. We have potential space. What do we do? And they were like, you got to build a team. So we contacted an interior design, an architect, a contractor, and we started getting bids from all these people. And in the meantime, we were still working our menu and testing almost every other day in Richard's kitchen. And I think in the middle of it, we decided to do a pop-up. One of our friends who owns a barbecue restaurant was having a charity pop-up series and convinced us to do one. And to our surprise, it was pretty popular and
very busy.
And we
sold out very quickly.
We didn't think it was going to be that busy, and that kind of fueled us to push even harder to get this place open.
You guys did the pop-up with Turkey and the Wolf, right?
We did.
That was the second one we did. We did one with Blue Oak Barbecue.
So you did your first one with Blue Oak Barbecue.
Yeah, which I was reluctant about both of them. I hated the idea. I didn't like it at all. I couldn't see the positives over what I was considering the negatives, which was just we had a bunch of specialty equipment in our restaurant that, through research, we had found out that that's what makes Chinese food taste so inherently Chinese. Is this equipment? It's a high carbon or thin carbon steel on a high wok burner that creates this kind of ignited oil flavor that permeates the food that you cannot get without it.
To go back to the example of fried rice, like the reason that you can't, I don't know, maybe you can, but the reason it's very unlikely that you'll make fried rice, even if we gave you the exact recipe we use, the reason it wouldn't taste the same in your house is because you don't have a burner that gets as hot as these wok burners. You know, and we've got outside propane burners in every backyard in the city of New Orleans for boiling crawfish, and they sound like a jet when you turn them on. But the ones we have here in the restaurant are louder than that.
Oh, wow.
They're hotter than that.
So. Yeah, I mean, I tried propane burners; it didn't work. It was a bust. So we had to kind of make this pop-up series and the menu for them based around that. Like, we had to do dishes that kind of didn't need that. It would help if it had it, but it would still work without it, kind of thing. So that's why we never did fried rice with it. We never did a bunch of things, and I was just afraid that the first bit of food that people were tasting from us, especially since we had a bunch of hype because Mason was blowing us up on Instagram, and our Instagram was taking off before we were open, that if they came out and tried this food that was, in my mind, not as good as it should be, I was very worried about it. But it was fine. It was me being paranoid. And obviously the food, I think it's better now. But, you know, the pop-ups were successful.
It's one thing to say that you're going to do something. It's another to actually do it. And it's even a step further for that thing to be successful. How did the first one go? Like, what were the good and bad with it?
I mean, the bad was that we would sell out of things before we realized that we were out of them, and then we definitely upset some people who, like, ordered the food and it was like, oh, we don't have this, sorry. Like, they were like, but I ordered it. Like, yeah, but everyone ordered, like I think we served 400 people or something.
Oh, wow. How was the reception of that pop-up for you guys?
Overwhelmingly positive. People were so supportive, and I mean, you know, I think part of that is because it was for charity, and people give you a little more leeway in terms of being judgmental when you're doing something for a good cause. But I think that was only a small part of why the reception was so positive. We got a lot of nice comments and a lot of people saying, you know, how much they enjoyed everything and how much they couldn't wait for the next one, for the restaurant to open and all this stuff. And it went very, very well. We couldn't have. I don't think it could have gone better, quite honestly.
And did you have to change anything after the pop-up, or did everything translate pretty well?
Obviously, like, you know, still going back to the issue of the specialty equipment, we added things. Like, we didn't do the Peking duck at either of those pop-ups because we didn't have we knew that we couldn't make a satisfactory version in a traditional convection oven.
Right.
We tried 100 different ways in the ovens at Koshan with every different kind of duck we could get our hands on, every different kind of, like, preparation for them. We didn't have the woks to do fried rice. We didn't have.
Are you speaking of the dishes that we did at the pop-up? They changed from then to now?
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's almost not recognizable from what we were doing at that pop-up to what we're doing now.
It'd be like watching an episode of The Simpsons from when it was on the Tracy Ullman show to like watching an episode of The Simpsons now, and it's like these are the same characters, but it's gotten a lot more refined.
So you guys did your pop-ups, and you started opening Blue Giant. How did that go? Man,
so the day we like did a soft opening from the Thursday through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just dinner service, and then we didn't really like super advertise it or whatever. We just let people know, and because we live in a pretty like tight-knit neighborhood, and as well as, you know, have a pretty good group of friends, we were packing the dining room on all of those days for the soft opening, and then that Monday that was going to be the full opening. Was a go, and that was the day of the college football national championship game, which LSU won, and so that, I think, gave us kind of it was our slowest day, that to date was that like grand opening day, because everybody was watching that game. Although I suspect we may have been the busiest restaurant in town without a TV, which is kind of cool. Then that Wednesday we opened for lunch as well as dinner, and it was pretty much nonstop ever since. Like the only day that I think really the only day we didn't have at some point up to at least an hour wait for a table was the last day that restaurants were allowed to be open, and people had already started to, you know, um, think about things like social distancing and stuff like that. We're still quite busy that day, but not. And then the next day was the day that we made the switch to takeout only, and but I mean those first 2 months, January, February, and up through whenever it was in March, were very busy, just like all guns blazing, nonstop, which was awesome. I mean, it was really, really cool.
It has been awesome watching the response that I've seen on Instagram. How did it feel seeing such a positive response to Blue Giant when you guys opened up?
It was such a relief. I mean, it was, you spent so long being so worried about everything, and that whether or not it would ever open at all, and if it ever did, what would the people think? And that's, I think, just being cautious. You don't want to be, conceited or complacent when you're doing something like this, when you've got so much on the line. And then it was like being able to like take a first big breath for the longest time.
Yeah.
When we opened the doors, people were lined up out the door. People in here were happy. It was like just a huge, massive sigh of relief until you turned around and realized, well, okay, now we just have to do this every day for the rest of our lives.
It was a lot like being in the ocean, and like all of a sudden the wave hit you, and then you're like, you're calm, that's fine. But then you realize you have to maintain this amount of business, and since we were so new, there was no like systems in place. There was no. I would say the first couple of weeks were bittersweet. It was like, wow, we're really busy. It's super surreal. I'm so glad we're open, but we weren't staffed up. I mean, the kitchen needed like a ton of prep cooks, and we don't have a walk-in, we just have 2 double door refrigerators, and we're trying to figure out. We're literally prepping everything we need for the night the morning before. So we weren't open for lunches initially, and all the food that we were serving that night would come in that morning because we had no fridge space. And so we had to figure out clever ways to eventually open up for lunch. There was no other option. We're opening for lunch, And so it was little things like that. And thank God the staff was just super cool about it and ready to figure out these problems together instead of kind of going, well, I just work here. It's not my problem. No one has that attitude. Everybody wanted to help. So it was a good feeling.
What is the working dynamic between you two guys? Is there good cop, bad cop, or has it always been something organic since working together at Cochon?
So I run the front of the house now. Billy has significantly more experience, both cooking generally and also in a back of the house managerial role. So it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense for both of us to be in the kitchen in our minds. So I run the front of the house because otherwise we'd have to pay someone else to do it, and that we're not trying. We didn't have like an abundance of cash to be hiring on a bunch of salaried employees when we opened. We still don't. So we there's not really like we manage the two different sides of the restaurant, and obviously as both as owners, we're in charge of all aspects of it equally together. But we don't. It's not like someone's going to come to one of us and be like, "Hey, like, does this taste okay?" And they'll say no, and like, "Well, Billy said it tasted fine." Like, there's not like, you know,
they know that if one of us isn't here, the next person is. So my kitchen crew knows that if I'm not here, Richard's the person to go to, and vice versa with front of the house. And I don't, I think Richard feels comfortable managing the kitchen staff if I'm not here, or even if I am here, and vice versa. But there has to be basically things and tasks we can rely on each other to do without asking, just to make the restaurant run. I understand that Richard's going to make all the orders and scheduling for front of the house, so I don't have to do it. And same with me in the kitchen. Same with him with all purchasing of liquor and wine and what goes on the wine list and what. But he'll, when the wine comes in, I'll taste it with him, or I'll taste a cocktail before it goes on the menu. Or Richard will have to approve something that goes on the food menu before it goes on the menu. It's very much a partnership that we know we have our own tasks and we have our own roles and we're going to get them done, and we don't have to ask each other to do it. It's pretty smooth, I would say.
Do you guys feel like it's been a success? Like, do you feel like you accomplished what you set out to do when you started this process?
I think so. I really, really do. I think that, like I said, the vast majority of people who come and eat here have been very, very happy with the food. All different kinds of people from the neighborhood, like a lot of people from the neighborhood, and it was really exciting to see in such a short time to develop such a devoted group of regulars who would be in here, so frequently. And that was one of the biggest goals, was to be a place in the neighborhood for the neighborhood, but also to have a wider appeal. And we've certainly seen people from all over coming in here. We probably could have seen more of that had Jazz Fest not been canceled. But even in the short time, we had people coming in who were in town visiting, and certainly a neighborhood Chinese restaurant is not at the top of your list of places to go eat when you visit New Orleans. Yeah. So it was pretty special that in the short time that we were open for regular business, we had already started to develop a reputation of a place that was worth a visit, even if it wasn't what you thought of when you thought of New Orleans. So I think we were doing what we had set out to do.
Most chefs want to present what they love, and for Richard and Billy, that was Chinese food. Blue Giant Chinese is not about reinventing the wheel. It's about execution. Billy and Richard did not set out to change people's idea of what Chinese food is. They showed up so they could fucking nail it. Blue Giant is prospering in an area that's rich with wonderful food experiences, which makes their notoriety that much more impressive. And I cannot wait to meet Billy and Richard and experience Blue Giant Chinese for myself. Thank you guys for listening to this bonus episode. We're currently tossing around ideas for season 2, and we cannot wait to bring you some more content. Thanks for listening.